Sorry to interrupt the honourable member. I call David Clendon.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I'm pleased to take a brief call to reaffirm the Greens' support for this bill, and at the risk of further offending Mr Hipkin's sensibilities, I will refer to the Hutt City Council, given that it is the entity in whose name this bill is. And they do deserve congratulations, and particularly the Mayor, who I understand has provided some real leadership on this to get the solution to this point where it has been passed into law. I don't pretend to know either Upper or Lower Hutt well. Certainly I have no particular close experience of it. But having up until quite recently lived much of my life in Auckland City, I'm no stranger to graffiti or to the significant cost that's imposed visually, socially, and not least of all economically. And I think there would be a very strong case to encourage other councils to pick up a similar piece of legislation, and for this House to create some sort of general law that would enable other councils to resolve the issue of entering onto private land to remove this unsightly blot on the landscape, which graffiti is and always will be. As I said, I've got no particular, I don't know the Hutt particularly well, but I'm interested to note that in the Select Committee report, the comparison was made with the Auckland rail corridor, and I do know a thing or two about the scale of the problem in that context. I know that Kiwi Rail, supported by some very able and willing volunteer groups, have been working incredibly hard to try and clean up the Auckland rail corridor. So if Hutt City is experiencing the problem on the same scale of that, then they most certainly do have a problem. And indeed, Kiwi Rail in Auckland ran up against the same issue, private buildings bordering their rail corridor, and they needed to seek permission to go and actually remove the graffiti there, for the simple reason they had no absolute right to deal with that. A bill of this nature, I suspect, would have facilitated that process for them considerably, and for that reason it's to be supported. The point's been made that the Greens did oppose a previous attempt to manage graffiti, which was the Manukau solution, as it was possessed at the time. We saw that that was not the path to go down, to effectively criminalise young people simply for carrying marker pens. It was a highly complicated, somewhat punitive approach. This is a much cleaner, simpler approach. It simply puts the solution in the hands of the local authority and the community, not without considerable cost, and I acknowledge that, but over time hopefully we'll uncover and apply some longer-term solutions. Like Mr Okenvold, I'm actually old enough to recall when graffiti really wasn't particularly a problem in our cities and towns and elsewhere. And it's unfortunate to see that it has become so ubiquitous and so costly and so negative in our communities. I recall, in fact, in the late 70s, doing just as a hobby, I did some photographic courses and did a little bit of a photographic essay of some of the graffiti that was around Auckland. And almost without exception, it was social and political commentary, some of it very clever, some of it very witty, some of it very apt to the political context of the day, which is not to excuse it or suggest it's acceptable, but I actually had to literally go looking for examples of graffiti, and that's not that long ago. Nowadays, of course, one is hard-pressed in many areas, very many communities, to find a wall that is not defaced at some point, and we have certainly got to a serious situation with this graffiti. I think the definition in the bill is good. I think it's a very useful and positive addition to the bill, to the legislation, that we are defining very clearly what it is we are talking about, to avoid the unfortunate incidents where murals, where graffiti art, as it's referred to, will be protected. Again, I'm not a particular fan of graffiti art, but I acknowledge there are many who do admire it and appreciate it, and it has proven as a very effective mechanism for preventing the taggers, the defacing that we've seen far too much of. As I've said, we need to continue to investigate the root causes, youth alienation, the fact that youth particularly youth, who perform this, the tagging, clearly have no empathy, no sense of the impact, the negative, the cost they're imposing, the social cost, the making people feel invulnerable if their homes or properties are damaged by graffiti. That's a much more difficult task. It'll take a great deal of local government, community and other authorities' work. I commend this bill and the Hutt City Council on this very useful measure. Got it.
I call Mike Sabin.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. A very brief call, and the last one from the National Party benches.